Hello, I'm Soo Romanoff from Edison Group, and today we're catching up with Sten Sörensen, CEO of Cereno Scientific. Welcome, Sten.
Thank you.
So I understand Cereno Scientific is focused on the development of novel treatments for cardiovascular disease. It's a pretty large market with multiple indications and available treatment options. Could you help me better understand how you're positioned and differentiated?
Yeah, absolutely. So, our ultimate goal, of course, is to create patient value. So value for patients in dire need of better therapies. And we have targeted, and we are targeting that with, and we believe we are pioneers with untapping the untapped potential of epigenetic modulation in cardiovascular disease through applying HDAC inhibition with two of our programs. So there are multiple benefits, we believe, of utilizing epigenetic modulation through HDAC inhibition. And we believe one of the benefits here is that to be able to have a reverse remodeling impact in cardiovascular disease in general, which is one of the progressive matters that happens in many indications, starts with inflammation, goes through fibrosis. You get higher pressure in systemic or lung circulation, and you get hypertrophy, and eventually you get failing hearts. And many times this leads to thrombosis, stroke in the brain, or myocardial infarction, which is the major cause of death on the planet. So maybe shorter, we want to impact the remodeling that happens in cardiovascular disease with HDAC inhibition. The other approach that we have here is that we believe that with HDAC inhibition, and we believe so based on our proof of concept studies in thrombosis, that we have a mode of action that will be able to prevent thrombosis events without causing the increased risk of bleed that the current therapies are so much affected with. So that's another very important need out in the market in thrombosis prevention. So based on current therapies, which all weaken the coagulation system, and these therapies are not able to be added together because the bleeding risk increases if you do so. And thus you have not an optimized efficacy with the current therapeutics that are out there, which are antiplatelets and anticoagulants. And we believe with our approach with HDAC inhibition that we can have effective prevention of thrombosis and without causing that increased risk of bleed. Thus, it could be single therapy or added to the other therapies, improving both efficacy with a safer approach.
So I think you have three different assets. You have CS1, CS014, CS585. Could you provide a brief overview of each along with the current stage of development?
Yeah, so we started the company with our approach and vision to actually then develop a new drug to prevent thrombosis without increased risk of bleed, and to do so with epigenetic modulation, actually increasing the synthesis, storage and release capacity of a protein called TPA, which is fibrinolytic and is stored in the vessels. So we approach this with a drug, a molecule that's been in man for about 60 years, used for epilepsy, valproic acid. And we have taken that molecule and we've repurposed it into our own specific formulation called CS1. And we have, whilst we pursued that drug, we actually discovered through the advice from our scientific advisory board that HDAC inhibition has a much broader application, as I mentioned, than thrombosis prevention. So we did a full review of all the documentation that's there, of which 100 of the most articles are published in Lancet by the scientific advisory board members. And we pivoted our first drug candidate, CS1, over to PAH, the rare disease pulmonary arterial hypertension. The reason was for this pivot that we found that the HDAC inhibition through VPA has documented anti-inflammatory, anti-fibrotic, pressure-reducing capacity, both systemic and lung, as well as antithrombotic capacity. And this fits very, very well with the progression and pathophysiology in PAH patients. So that's our lead drug, and it's in phase 2 in collaboration with Abbott, approaching phase 2 milestone this year. The second drug is CS014. That's a novel HDAC inhibitor, an NCE, if you will. And we pursued that as we had discovered the broad potential that we have here with HDAC inhibition. And then we wanted to pursue a second generation, if you will, in CS014. And that's now targeted for thrombosis prevention, which was the original approach by the company with this mode of action. And that compound, CS014, just received patent approval in the UK as the first patent, and is targeted to submit an IND during the spring here and to start phase 1 trial as we approach the summer. And I should also, of course, mention the third asset. So as we were moving with these two assets, we made a strategic decision in the company to become more of a real biotech, not a project-oriented biotech, but having a portfolio and to have more legs to stand on, but also to continue to be innovative. So we had already met Professor Michael Hollenstadt, who's active at University of Michigan, as he was evaluating our first two candidate drug assets, CS1 and CS014. And in discussions with him, we discovered that he was the innovator, together with a colleague, of CS585, a novel IP receptor agonist, which is based on an endogenic lipid. So that's CS585, and that has been evaluated in thrombosis prevention also, as CS014 has been in his laboratories, and was recently published in Blood. And got quite some attention with the podcast and an editorial related to that research, and was described as a potential novel strategy, that receptor and this agonist, for thrombotic prevention without increased risk of bleed. So we have actually two assets here that we're pursuing for prevention of thrombosis, although I should say that CS585, we haven't chosen the target indication yet.
Okay, that's great. So we're really looking forward to your upcoming phase 2 CS1 trial readouts, and we're interested in the collaboration with Abbott and the CardioMEMS HF system. Could you recap the advantages of integrating these measures into your design, and then also cover off the potential disease-modifying capabilities?
Yeah, so, we were actually advised by Dr. Raymond Benza, who recently started his new position at Mount Sinai, recruited by Deepak Bath to that position, to run actually pulmonary hypertension programs throughout the 8 hospitals related and connected in Manhattan. Dr. Benza advised us to contact Abbott and Dr. Phil Adamson to create a collaboration as we were pursuing our phase 2 trial, which is now ongoing. And we had to have negotiations or talks with the FDA about how we should apply and leave in our IND application. And eventually this led to an application that includes Abbott's CardioMEMS technology in our IND application after discussions with drug and tech divisions at FDA. So CardioMEMS is approved in heart failure, used in more than 30,000 patients, has actually documented improved survival just by having the technology in these patients in the monitor trial. And we are very happy to have this collaboration with Abbott in our phase 2 trial, because CardioMEMS is, as it is an implantable device in the pulmonary artery, is able to wirelessly capture multiple functional and parameters out of the patient. And in comparison to right heart catheterization, which is the standard that you do in these studies with pulmonary arterial hypertension, you do right heart cath in the beginning and the end of the study, and you get those points of measurements. And we have a 12-week study, and we can capture data every day wirelessly. So rather than having a couple of points, we get about 2,000 data points out of a patient during these 12 weeks. And of course, in relation to baseline, which we measured to, we get a very thorough data set from this CardioMEMS technology. Abbott has never done this collaboration for a new indication for CardioMEMS and a new drug to be evaluated in their 120-year history. So we're proud of that collaboration, but it's also effective for us, we believe. We are collaborating in this trial, so it's Cerenos. We are the sponsor, and Abbott is supporting us with CardioMEMS technology, and also vetting and educating the sites to utilize that technology in the trial.
So that's actually really interesting, right? So we touched on this a little bit earlier, but what's the commercial opportunity and planned strategy of your assets, assuming that the upcoming phase 2 data is favorable?
Well, so the field of pulmonary arterial hypertension, we believe, is moving towards a new era. So there's a paradigm shift going to happen. It's already started, if you will. I have myself been part of pursuing paradigm shifts in heart failure, starting 2 survival trials with hormonal control, with the RALS trial, MR antagonist, spironolactone, and with the beta blocker, metoprolol, the MERIT-HF trial. Both those trials improved survival with plus 30%, each of them, published in New England Journal of Medicine. And when these were initiated, the heart failure therapeutic approach was more pump and plumbing. So, you utilize inotropic agents or fluid like furosemide, those kind of measures. And now, if you look at heart failure therapy 30 years later, you have 5, maybe 6 therapies used in parallel in these patients with tremendous results. So we believe, and as you know, pulmonary arterial hypertension results in right heart failure, and that's actually the cause of death here in these patients. And the mean prognosis here, life expectancy from diagnosis, is 7 years, 7.5 years. So, and this is with pump and plumbing approach, with most of, or all of the agents actually approved and utilized in these patients are vasodilators. So by that, they lower the pressure, but they don't really have a serious impact on remodeling and the underlying cause of the disease. So that's what's going on here. So the new players, of which we believe Cereno is one, is moving for disease modification impact. You can call it reverse remodeling. And as an example, Merck acquired Acceleron with the drug sotatercept little more than 2 years ago, November 21, for just that purpose, to get their hands on a drug that is believed to be disease modifier. It's a TGF-beta, so an anti-inflammatory trap molecule, an antibody. And we have seen in trials that have been done with our molecule similar efficacy in pulmonary arterial hypertension proof of concept studies in rats as have been seen with sotatercept. And we believe we have a broader approach for impact on inflammation and structural remodeling than one would achieve with a TGF-beta approach. But it's up to us to prove. So we think we are one of the new players. being able to reverse remodel? And if so, you know, we will be one of the drugs that are used a lot in these patients. Looking at this agent that we have, it's a molecule that's been in man for, as I mentioned, almost 60 years for asymptomatic disease, epilepsia. Here we have a deadly disease with a short life expectancy. And if you look at the drugs that are on the market, they are affected with quite some side effects. And it looks like sotatercept also would have, with its approach, some impact on side effects here. And here we have CS1 approaching, you know, at the end of phase 2 with an oral drug that's been in man for ages and that looks to be a disease modifier. And if we succeed here, it will be a major thing.
Yeah. So we're really excited about the expansion of your management team. I believe you just added Dr. Rahul Agrawal. I mean, how is he going to work with Bjorn going forward?
Yeah, so, you know, as we grow here, we have one study approaching readout. And of course, you need to handle that well. It's important. And then we also are going into negotiations with FDA for a pivotal trial, anticipating a positive outcome and enough information from this trial. So that's a major undertaking for a biotech. In addition, our second program is now approaching the start of first time in man studies, phase 1, CS014. So we will have 2 drugs in clinic, and the third one then continuing in preclinical. So we have been on the look for a real capacity to join our team. And I think, you know, Björn Dahlev, who has spent some of his time before with Vicor, on which have, you know, is pursuing IPF among other things, and very knowledgeable about pulmonary diseases and cardiovascular diseases. He has been working very closely with the team and with me and the scientific advisory board to build our scientific platform. And he will continue to do so. As we have grown, you know, the operational pressures on a company like this increases. And so the move we have done here now is to recruit Dr. Agrawal, who has a fantastic CV. He is a cardiologist educated from the US, educated in Germany, started with clinical trials, then to Menarini, then to Bayer, and worked on pulmonary arterial hypertension with Adempas and other projects, and was recruited over to Astra, spent 8 years with Astra, pursuing the biggest trial Astra has ever pursued in its history of existence. And he's been franchise leader and clinical leader, etc. So he's a great addition to us and has now taken over the responsibility for the entire R&D program. And Björn will then continue to be the chief scientific officer across all projects.
So you have a lot going on, and it's nice to have a full management team here. What are the most significant catalysts investors should look for in the next 12 to 18 months?
So I think, you know, obviously our lead program, CS1 in the rare disease pulmonary arterial hypertension, is approaching a readout in a few months here. And everybody is looking for that. And that's a serious inflection point for a biotech, of course. And with the background we have here, so we've been able to peek at the data a bit. So we have a patient case that looks tremendous. We call it the remarkable patient case from last summer. And then we had a readout on 60% of the patients in October. And then the last inclination here, I would say, is the request from investigators for us to pursue compassionate use or expanded access for CS1 to these patients, because as we see it, we see inclination of very good clinical effect, across the dosages, and we see physicians, investigators who doesn't want to let go of the drug for the patients. And that's a very good sign and provides hope and confidence for us. We'll see what the data shows. But the key inflection point for us this year is the readout of the phase 2 data. I should also say that we have the other impact is, of course, submission approval of the IND to FDA, or actually Swedish authorities, for CS014 and the start of that study in man, the phase 1 study. And the third thing that's going to happen this year, I think, is our approach to the FDA, which we hope to pursue by the end of this year, based on the outcome of the phase 2 trial. And of course, other matters this year is we have a TO3, a financing event coming up. It's actually a pricing period at the moment, and then there will be a subscription period. And it's a warrant package from the last share issue we did last summer. So that's a significant event from a capitalization point of view.
So thank you, Sten. This was very informative, and thank you all for joining us here today. If you'd like to learn more about Cereno Scientific, please refer to edisongroup.com. Thank you.
Thank you.